I received a lot of questions following my interview with Professor Charles Kupchan, Senior Fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations and the Professor of International Affairs at Georgetown University in the Walsh School of Foreign Service and Department of Government. And a lot of these questions came from outside the United States. So, first of all, I'm glad that people like the interview, like the topic. It's always validating to know that the topics that we put out and we choose for this show are resonating with our audience. But a lot of the questions that I received followed a similar theme. So rather than just pick, one or two questions and try to address them individually, I'm going to group the bunch of these and try to address all of your inquiries in one fell swoop. So at the end of my interview, as I always do in my shows, I offered a point of view. In this case, I offered a couple of different challenges to the assumptions that we made as part of the conversation. So one of the assumptions that we made is that the United States of America is going through the beginning or potentially middle stages of the end of its period as the preeminent force and center of gravity in global politics, economics, and society. And that the American empire was clearly in its final chapter, and that we were discussing what could come next and how that transition could take place. The other assumption that we made was that it will be a gradual process, that this will take a generation or more before we even know what emerges as a follow-up. So at the end of the interview, I had said, let's challenge those assumptions. Let's not assume that we know definitively that the U.S. is in its final chapter of empire and that we are guaranteed to have this transition in our immediate lifetime. And also, if we think that there may be a transition, let's not assume that it will take a generation. So I challenged our listeners to consider everything we talked about in that conversation through a different lens. Consider what the world might look like next if the U.S. decline is rapid, and consider what it would look like if the decline is actually not real, and that there's 100 more years to run of the quote-unquote Pax Americana period of stability and relative peace with the U.S. as the center of that order and the center of the world order and the organizing body of world affairs. And so as a lot of the questions I got from people was basically, hey, we appreciate the interview. We love the perspective, but we'd really like to know, you, Brian, as an American living in the United States, what do you think is going to happen? What is your gut telling you? What do you feel is the most likely of the scenarios you talked about? So I thought, for the American audience, this may not be as useful because we all live here in the U.S. and we probably have our perspectives and our views, but I can understand how those who have not been to the U.S., don't live in the U.S., haven't had the same exposure, how it would be difficult to understand what we see because you're looking at the U.S. from the outside in. So let me offer this perspective. As I said at the end of that interview, I am not qualified to really opine on what direction I think this is going to go. The reason I bring on guests like the professor are that they have spent a lifetime in service to the country and studying these topics and issues. And so it qualifies them to offer a perspective. It's an informed view and it's worthy of dialogue and conversation. The best I can do is offer speculation and observation. So since you asked, so many of you asked, let me offer this observation. It's my general feeling living in the United States that it does not and has not for my lifetime felt like a place in any significant decline. The standards of living in the U.S. have only gotten better for many people. The technological innovations have made life easier. I mean, just in my personal lifetime, what I have experienced from being a young child who didn't have internet in their home, who didn't even have, none of my family had a cell phone when I was a kid. Communications were just generally harder. Information was more siloed. It was more challenging to stay in touch with people over long distances. The access to healthcare was okay, but the innovations themselves were not great. In fact, I have family members who had, procedures that now have advanced significantly in a lot of very basic, very measurable, very observable ways. The quality of life living in the U.S. has been better and better in most years. And though we've had our ups and downs economically, and we've had all kinds of challenges, as every nation does, the trajectory has been very positive. And it still feels like there are innovations and positive developments and economic growth and promise and opportunity around virtually every corner. It's still a dynamic place with new businesses and new communities and thriving cities and rich culture. And despite anything you hear or see in the media, it's still a very accepting place of anyone who's willing to work hard and sacrifice. And I'm not saying it's a perfect environment. I'm not saying there aren't people who are discriminated against and left behind, but by and large is still a dynamic place where anybody who has a good idea and who is willing to listen, learn, adapt, can thrive. And I think these are the important elements that tell you whether a country is still thriving and growing or going through decline. So living in the US, you don't feel that. Now, if you ask me, what does my gut tell me about the future? I'll simply say this. I don't think it's going to be gradual. Whatever happens next in the history of the world and geopolitics, I don't believe it's going to be something that plays out over 10 or 15 years. I think it's going to be either sudden, that the U.S. very rapidly exits the world stage as the key arbiter of major decisions in the center of gravity, and it will happen in a very short period of time, probably chaotically, probably with a lot of very serious consequences for the U.S. and other allies and other countries. And that vacuum will be rapidly filled by a variety of players who will compete aggressively with each other to take up the spots left behind by the U.S. Or this will be a very long process with the U.S. retaining its primacy in the world for many, many, many decades to come. So the point is, in my personal view and based on what I experienced living in the country, I think the least likely scenario is a 20 or 25 year transition. If we're going to see the U.S. step off the stage, it's going to happen suddenly. It will happen potentially in shocking ways with shocking speed. And the U.S. will go from the center of the world to the sidelines in the world in a relatively short period of time. Or none of that will happen. No one else in the world will supplant the U.S. No group of nations will. And though there certainly will be a natural resorting of regional authorities and powers, the U.S. will retain its overwhelming position simply because of the rest of the world's inability to use technology to catch up. And that the same innovations that allow the rest of the world's standard of living to rise, that the U.S. will use those same tools to maintain its position and its lead. And that no matter the desire of some nations to take a stronger role in the world, they simply won't be able to do it, whether because of demographic challenges, geographic challenges, economic challenges, societal challenges, historical challenges. No one will rise to the occasion. I guess the bottom line is I see it going one way or the other. It's going to be one extreme or the other. Either the U.S. fades away rapidly in the coming years, or it retains its primacy for most of the rest of our lifetimes. That's one person's opinion based on what I see living in the country that we are talking about and observing the world and the questions that I've had and some of the answers I've received from people who are in a position to know. But that's just my opinion. If this has sparked this many questions, I'd love to hear your opinion, and I'd love to take another segment on this channel and read through some of your comments. So send them to me, info@brianjmatos.com. Of course, you can leave comments on this video on the YouTube channel. You can reach out to me across any social media platform. And please subscribe to this channel for more videos and clips like this. And also subscribe to my main podcast feed so that you can be the first to hear captivating interviews like my most recent episode with Professor Kupchan. Thank you all again for subscribing to this channel and for listening to my points of view on things. I look forward to hearing from you and keeping the conversation going.